between now and November, you hear more and more about this year's midterm elections and how important they are, especially here in Florida, where we're about to elect a new governor and U.S. senator. This week, we're going to go over the hottest races on the ballot here in Brevard County and what trends you might be seeing. I'm Isadora Rangel, and welcome to I Am Brevard. I sat down with Kathryn Rudloff, Executive Director of Business Voice, a local political action committee. Kathryn is a former campaign staffer for Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign and Brevard County Congressman Bill Posey. Using her on-the-ground experience, Kathryn and I talked about what you can expect in November. Watch. Kathryn, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here today.
So let's start with what is Business Voice? It's a political action committee, but what is exactly the purpose of your PAC?
Sure. We provide local businesses throughout the Brevard County and the Space Coast region a cohesive voice in political advocacy. I work with our investors to build relationships with the candidates and elected officials throughout our region. And then obviously coming into election season, we take a pretty big role. You know, the best way to have quality elected officials is to make sure you really have quality candidates that are running on the front end. We are nonpartisan, so we you know, look at candidates across the spectrum, and we are a state level PAC. So we only get involved in the state legislature and county level races. We're actually not quite large enough to get into municipal races, but I hope someday maybe we'll grow and we'll be able to engage in that. But we don't really participate in federal races.
Yeah. And you have quite a bit of experience. You worked with Congressman Posey here in Brevard and Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign in Florida. So we're going to talk about probably one of my favorite topics, which is elections and politics.
Mine too.
And boy, you guys have your plate full, especially locally, because what we're seeing is we have a newly energized Democratic Party, which is putting a candidate in virtually every race, as far as I know. So let's go down the list. Let's start at the local level. What are the hottest races that our viewers should be following this year?
I hate to say every race is important. You know, every race is important at some level, but certainly right now in the county commission, because we see so many votes that are 3-2 or 4-1, but it's that 3-2 balance that we see a lot. That makes 2 seats up for election on the county commission very important, because then if one of those votes were to change, you could see the trend and the activity happening on our current county commission changing. So I think in terms of the races that will have the most direct impact on our local economy and on everyday voters throughout Brevard County, the county commission would be the priority race. But certainly we also have 3 school board seats up, and
post-Parkland.
Yes, that is on the forefront of everyone's mind right now, so that certainly is very important. And we have a lot of activity at our state legislative level. So it's going to be an interesting cycle. Your point about a busy cycle, you did not even mention the initiatives. And because of the Constitutional Review Commission, in addition to all of our statewide cabinets and governor, a U.S. Senate race, we are also going to have, I think it's up to 13 or 14, and there's many ballot initiatives right now, and that's not counting any local initiatives that might be put on. So it will be a very crowded, very busy election cycle for voters.
So let's go back again to the county commission. You have 2 seats on the ballot. One of them is an incumbent who's running for re-election, Commissioner Curt Smith. He has a primary challenger, former Commissioner Trudy Infantini, and also a general election challenger as well. People usually assume that the incumbent has the advantage, but it seems like this is going to be a really tough primary for him.
This will be a tough primary. I would argue that Trudy Infantini will benefit a little bit from that incumbency factor, because she did serve for 8 years, and with the last name like Infantini, for people who lived in the area during her tenure, that's a very memorable name, whereas Smith, you know, you always worry when you have a name like that, you don't benefit as much from that power of incumbency, because it's all about name ID. And really, Curt Smith is going to have a tough race, because the last time he ran, it was a very crowded primary. I believe there were 7 Republicans on the ballot, and so when you look at his total vote share that last time, you know, it was smaller. I think he won with, you know, maybe like 7,000 votes. So it's not like he has this constituency, a large, 10 or 12,000 block of voters that are carrying forward with him. So he's going to have to really earn both the primary. The general election I don't think will be as difficult for him because this district leans very heavily Republican. I always look at the voter registration, and while it has a significant number of nonpartisans, traditionally when you look at other elections, this is a very Republican district.
And talking about the makeup of the commission, let's say if Trudy Infantini actually wins this election, it's going to have large repercussions on what kind of votes we're going to see coming out of the commission. Explain a little bit about the dynamics that we have today on the commission and how adding Trudy Infantini would kind of change that.
Because she's a lot more,
she's more to the right than Kurt Smith, I guess. Sure. That is sort of her pitch, actually. Yeah. And you also have another commissioner already on the commission, John Tabaya, and it seems the assumption is that they would caucus together.
Oh, absolutely.
It changed a lot of things in Brevard, right?
Right, no, absolutely. So Commissioner Tabaya, from the time that he was first elected to the state legislature, he's an academic, right? He's a college professor over at Valencia, I believe. And he has very strong anti-government, small government philosophies. And so he has been quite happy to take the position as an elected official to vote the moral no, I'm against it. And he doesn't really care about getting things done. He just, there's no compromising, to actually see a problem reach solution. He just wants to rein in the size of government, which is very admirable, and it's always good to have a contrarian, on a board to keep actions in check. However, when you get a third, right now Christina Znardia sometimes goes along with some of his efforts. If you have a third, you'll really see a contraction in what some would say the progress or the effectiveness of our county government. And Trudy Infantini, during her 8 years on the commission, also played that contrarian role. And she was somebody who brought up questions, much like John does, of why are we doing this and what's the purpose. But at the end of the day, she voted no on just about everything. And unless it actually benefited her district, she would vote no when it benefited other districts and communities. So when you have the reality of what could happen if they were to get together, I think that's the fear of a lot of local businesses, quite frankly, is that we'll see the productivity and a lot of the growth and a lot of the expansion and a lot of the great things that we're seeing happening in our community really risk coming to a halt. Sometimes I say it's nice to see the minority have their chance to govern because it's a lot harder than you think. Anybody can stand there and throw a tantrum and vote no and call people names. It's a lot harder to govern, and when the responsibility is jobs or people's livelihood or people's lives, it's a lot harder to make those tough decisions and just take that moral no.
Yeah, it'll be definitely interesting to watch. I'm very curious to see what happens. And the other thing that we have seen since 2016 is the local Democratic Party has reorganized itself. Has a lot of new energy, but we're still talking about Brevard, a heavily Republican county, but Democrats seem to think that they can win some seats this year. What is your outlook on their chances and what you've seen, and whether are we actually going to see results in November?
It's very hard to say, and I'm excited that they are enthusiastic. I think it's wonderful for the community when voters do have choice. Elections should be about choice and having options, so I think it's wonderful that we are seeing them able to fill up the slate of candidates so that voters have a choice. Now, that said, I hope that they don't get discouraged by just one cycle and that we'll continue to see this grow for future elections, because the reality is one time, one shot at this, they might not have a lot of wins. They certainly had very effective turnout in the municipal elections last year in 2017. And so if we see that level of turnout, and certainly that's what a lot of people are predicting, a blue wave or at least increased enthusiasm on the Democrat side, they could surprise us. They could have a few seats where I think they have real opportunity. But if they don't, I hope the enthusiasm carries over, because a county that's been as Republican as Brevard has been for so long isn't going to just
not in one election.
Switch in one election. I think it's more about as we have thousands of people moving into the community, making sure that we have elected officials that are representing all of us in our current population.
And what are your thoughts on this so-called blue wave? Is it really we're seeing some results outside of Florida and Pennsylvania, And Georgia just nominated a Democratic gubernatorial candidate who's an African-American woman, which is a first. Does that play at the local level as much as some people might assume it does?
It always is an influencing factor if there's enthusiasm, if there's more enthusiasm on one side or the other. That certainly will play a role in what's motivating folks to turn out. But in almost every special election or primary that we've seen so far, I would be able to argue that the candidates and their message, their fit for the district is unique, and that they had to carve a way that was unique for them. There's not some blue wave blueprint that they can come in and count on to rise them up. You've got to find the right candidate who has the right message for the district that's going to motivate voters to say, you know, you're the right person. And I would never say never, because we saw a special House race in the Sarasota County earlier this winter, and Sarasota County is very similar to Brevard, very conservative, very reliably Republican. And the Democrat won that special.
They flipped it.
They flipped it. So you can never say never. And I would again point to the candidates there and who ran a better campaign and whatnot. But that was a surprise. And when I saw that happen, I said, well, you know, never say never. It could happen here too.
And so let's talk about the issues that you think are going to be big in November. Obviously, we're still in late May, early June, so it's hard to say what people will be thinking about in November. But Parkland, I think it's undeniable that Parkland should play at least, even if a minor role in the elections. And how do you see that happening? And with 3 school board races on the ballot, I mean, I imagine that's going to be a major thing, especially with all the protests that we have seen against Army employees. How do you think that's going to play into these elections?
For the school board specifically, that will probably be the issue. I think our school board was finally running on all cylinders. They were at a good place where they were working together, you know, had a great superintendent. It felt like things were going in a wonderful direction. And then this Parkland incident has really, wow, has it taken our community, you know, taken the whole state, you know, and the whole country, you know, just right at the heartstrings. So that will definitely be the forefront, and how the incumbents who are up for re-election, because it's both Misty Belford and Andy Ziegler. John Craig, as of right now, has not filed. The belief is that he's not intending to run again. So that's just one open seat, but with those 2 incumbents who've been on there for some of these tough decisions, they're definitely going to have to talk to voters about how and why and their motivations for that. But I would also argue that for the state House and state Senate races, that this will be a significant, the Parkland and guns and that sort of conversation that happens, because so many voters, it's emotional. And so how those legislators handled it, how they are justifying their votes, whether they did or did not support the package that came down from Tallahassee, how they've been responding to voters since then, they will absolutely have to answer to voters for that. And
we saw a little bit of that when we had a town hall where we invited our lawmakers to talk about the bill and just the anger. Obviously, that's just a slice of the electorate, so you can't really extrapolate that much. But last time I checked, only 1 member of the Brevard delegation in Tallahassee voted against the Marjorie Stoneman bill, and that was Dorothy Hucol. Do you think that that helps them, or is that an issue for them having voted for the bill?
You know, I would never say something helps or hurts you, because it's all in why did you make that decision? You know, how did you come to that conclusion? How do you explain your vote to voters? From what I've heard from Dorothy, you know, I mean, she had a background in teaching, and she had some very strong concerns about it. And when she explains her no vote, I think that she does so eloquently and hopefully in a way that her voters, you know, can appreciate where she's coming from, the same way that those who voted to support it, they will have to try to do so eloquently and make the case.
Yeah, and let's move on to statewide races. 2 huge races, Rick Scott versus Bill Nelson for the U.S. Senate. This is the first time Bill Nelson has an actual strong opponent. Yeah. And Florida Today just ran a story on Sunday saying that Nelson is not really fazed by all the campaigning and all the money that Rick Scott is already spending. We know Rick Scott would put a lot of his own money to run a race. I think a lot of Democrats agree that Bill Nelson has a lot of reason to be concerned, right?
Absolutely.
And what is your outlook on that race?
Rick Scott is I've heard him described as just a machine. You know, he approaches, I'm sure he did it for his business life, but certainly his campaigns and his service in the governor's office. It is a very tight ship. It is efficient. He is willing to spend the money, but he's willing to spend the time, more importantly. And he spends just about all of his time talking to voters, meeting with voters, talking to the community, engaging people. And that's something that Senator Nelson, who has been out of the state for a long time, you know, because for the most part he's in Tallahassee. Now granted,
in D.C.
in D.C. Being an incumbent, he has, I don't even know how long he's been there, right? I mean, decades at this point. All of that experience in helping voters and constituents with problems and issues, having name ID, he's sent mailers, you know, he's been on the ballot. He's a known entity. But does he have the personal relationships, that personal connection with people? And if he's not going to be willing to run a campaign in a aggressive nature, he's up against somebody who will.
Yeah, and I've seen an interesting thing happening with Rick Scott. I mean, for many years you would say he was quite an unpopular governor. And after the hurricanes last year, you can sort of tell his popularity has grown. I mean, and after Parkland, I feel that he has positioned himself very well with these two major issues, right?
Yeah. No, I think, well, certainly for those two issues he's positioned himself well, but we can't forget that the economy in Florida has been gangbusters. And so somebody that positioned himself as the jobs governor and quite honestly has delivered, you know, on a lot of his promises to grow our economy and helping shape our economy, he has a record that I think he can run on and be proud of. I think Senator Nelson, he can approach Rick Scott because there's a lot of reasons certainly that people did criticize the governor and that he had, you know, was pictured in an unfavorable light before, but it's whether Nelson is willing to bring that out and call it. Nelson's always been a very polite Southern gentleman. Will he be willing to take on a popular governor to point to some of the, you know, remind voters of some of the things they didn't like about him?
Yeah, and Nelson is local. He's from Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk about the people trying to replace Rick Scott. And there are quite a few of them.
So many.
So many. For both parties. You have at least 4 major candidates in the Democratic primary. Gwen Graham, who is the daughter of former Governor and Senator Graham. You also have former Miami Beach Mayor Philip Levine, Andrew Gillum, and Chris King.
Chris Smith.
Is it Chris Smith?
I think it's Chris
King.
Chris King.
Yeah.
Yes, Chris King.
And then on the GOP side, you have Adam Putnam and you have Ron DeSantis.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about the latest controversy involving Publix and its donations to Adam Putnam. There were die-ins at Publix stores because Adam Putnam is a self-professed NRA sellout, and the Parkland kids do not like Publix's support. We recently ran a column saying that boycotts don't really work. Do you really think that this is harming Publix? But it seems like corporations throughout the board, they're really a lot more, they pay a lot more attention to how they position themselves politically.
They do, and at every business and every individual, as we see, you know, across the board in the public light, you can be very quickly, your brand can lose a lot of credibility very quickly in the age of social media and national media the way we have it. I would tend to agree. I'm not a big fan of protests and boycotts and that in terms of actually moving the needle and getting things done. I think there was a little bit of a moral victory in this one that Publix has said they wouldn't be giving further. But if you want to look back at Adam Putnam's career, he's from Lakeland. That's where he grew up, and since he first ran for office, Publix has been a supporter of his, you know, from his very first campaign until now. So they can say that maybe they won't be giving going forward, but Publix and Adam Putnam are very close, and I don't know that that's a relationship that either one is ashamed of, because they've been, that's who he is, that's where he's from, you know, and Publix is one of Florida's best brands.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting because reading the Tampa Bay Times story, which kind of brought this to light, the issue that jumped out to me was the fact that when Publix, I believe, failed some health inspections, Adam Putnam's Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services kind of looked the other way. But that's not really the issue. The issue is his alignment with the NRA, and I thought that was just, wow, this really shows where we are politically today. But let's talk about the Democrats. We see a lot of nastiness on both sides. Is that good when candidates from the same party are really going after each other? Not that that's that's new, right, in politics.
No, it's not new, and that's the downside of primaries. And anybody who is a party operative on either side, primaries are unfortunate, because then you're nitpicking over details and you're damaging somebody that at the end of the day you probably would support, in a general election. So it's always unfortunate to see that occur in primaries, but this is the first year where Democrats, probably in a long time, where Democrats feel like they have a chance at the governor's mansion, a true chance. And so there's a lot of passion behind that and wanting to make good choices. And they're seeing their factions, kind of quell over that. I actually, Chris King, I like him. I see a nice middle of the road path for him, and certainly appealing to Florida voters, because everybody else is kind of shooting at each other, and he's been slowly gaining, 1 or 2 points in the polls ahead of time. But when you have Levine willing to spend as much money as early as he is, the rest of the candidates are going to have a hard time. They're all known where they're from, but it's a statewide race, and they've really got to break out and get that statewide name ID up.
And on the GOP side, do you think Ron DeSantis, who's more of this libertarian kind of congressman, he has a lot of support from President Trump, and he's going after Adam Putnam, especially for money he's taken from the sugar industry. Yeah. Ron DeSantis is he's against the federal sugar price support program. Do you think he might be able to make some inroads with Republican voters?
I honestly think that race is going to set the tone for a lot of the discussion that we see around the state, because they will be two of the better funded candidates, and they will be the two that are going to drive issues like that discussing. So in the next 3 months, I think that race, more so even than the U.S. Senate race, if Senator Nelson continues to kind of sit back and wait approach that we've seen him do, that we're going to see DeSantis Putnam in that battle really be the defining discussion points, because there's just too many on the Democrat side. So yeah, absolutely, I think he's going to have an impact and I don't think there's anybody else that's going to jump in. I don't think at this point on the Republican side it's just the two of them. There's still even uncertainty on the Democrat side. Is somebody else still going to get in? Like what's going to happen these last 3 weeks before qualifying. So yeah, right now they're setting the discussion.
Yeah, and well, talking about the Democrats, we might have a bipartisan gubernatorial ticket. Former Congressman Patrick Murphy said he's considering jumping, and he would his running mate would be a Republican who was also a former Congressman, David Jolly. You and I talked about this before, but do you think that works? Do you think voters? The way I look at it, and I wrote a column about this, is we all complain about the partisan gridlock. Yeah. But when it comes to voting, I mean, Washington and the State House, they're all products of voters, right? So are they really ready to vote for a bipartisan ticket?
I would have been a lot more enthusiastic about the idea of a bipartisan ticket if they came out months ago. They've been kind of doing this feel-good listening tour and speaking tour, around Florida and nationally. If they'd come out months ago and announced they were running as purely independents, as a third option. But right now, because they haven't done that, they haven't been fundraising, they don't have kind of the resources to jump in at this point in the game, I would say, to make a competitive statewide race. One of them has to win through their primary process. And in order to do that, you'd be in what we've talked about, the very, beat up primary where you have to usually bank right or bank left, and then that makes it a lot harder to pivot to the middle. But there are finite resources in a state, and at this point, unless they have a campaign up and going and an organization put in place, it would be very difficult for them to mount that bipartisan ticket in an effective manner. Maybe the next cycle.
And especially with progressives being so energized, I wonder if they really. It might seem that the strategy here is that for Democrats to win, they have to appeal to Republicans. And I can see how some progressives are just going to be, no, we have to go progressive all the way. And let's talk about the Trump factor. That's something I think that's still kind of a wild card.
Absolutely.
I think a couple of months ago you would say that he was probably bad for Republicans, but you see his popularity ratings kind of surging a little bit, and he's campaigning on immigration, saying the midterms are all about immigration and protecting our borders. How do you see how do you see Donald Trump playing in the midterms?
Well, with Rick Scott and with Adam Putnam, how closely those gentlemen want to stand next to him and with him or away from him, with DeSantis being, kind of Trump's chosen candidate, he's going to play a huge impact. And that's the wild card. I mean, that really is a wild card, because at this point, you know, you wake up every day and you say, what happened? So, you know, I mean, who knows what could happen between now and Election Day to change both the discussion and just his value or lack thereof to candidates.
Yeah, the interesting thing is a lot of Republicans are running on if you elect a Democratic House or Senate, then President Trump might get impeached, and that seems to be sort of their campaign
Rally cry.
pitch, which is interesting. What other races should people be watching that we might have not have discussed?
You know, the one race we didn't talk about that will be interesting to see will be our state legislative race in House District 53. Representative Randy Fine has made a choice to be a very, some might say watchdog, some might say bulldog, and you know, that has offended a lot of voters, as we talked about, or you recently talked about in an opinion piece. He actually has 2 Democrat challengers this year, and of all of the House districts in Brevard County, that one is actually competitive, just by the registration numbers. It's competitive enough, and because he's had just as many negative headlines as he has had positive headlines, the House Republicans are actually paying for his campaign manager and trying to kind of bolster a local campaign effort for him. So I think that's definitely one of the races to watch. If either of those 2 Democratic candidates do in fact benefit from a little bit of a blue wave boost, and if he's managed to offend more than 2,000 Republican voters, then he could find himself a one-term legislator. But again, that's a long time off, and he's got a lot of resources in his bank account to combat that.
All right, Kathryn, we're out of time here. We could spend a whole day talking about this.
We could.
But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show for today. My thanks to Kathryn for joining me in the studio. And if you have questions regarding today's show, you can contact me at irangel@floridatoday.com. And be sure to join us again next week right here on WEFS and on floridatoday.com. Thank you.
Create the career of your dreams with a degree from Eastern Florida State College. Earn a bachelor's degree, associate's degree, or college certificate in growing job fields like healthcare, business, and computer technology. On campus or online, you can find inspiration and success. Anything's possible where Titans rise. Eastern Florida State College.